First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation here, and I would also like to acknowledge all of the Sami individuals in the room, as well as all the Inuit and any other Arctic indigenous peoples present here at this important annual gathering. I am going to address the issue of the power of indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is an intricate knowledge, a highly developed, highly sophisticated, and detailed understanding of, in our case, Arctic conditions, based upon a profound and intimate relationship with the environment, observations, and an understanding of the living creatures and their relationships to this environment. Indigenous knowledge is a systematic way of knowing. It holds its own methodologies and validation processes, and it cannot be and should not be validated by science. It's a living process that continues to build upon the knowledge acquired today as well as from the past, and will manifest itself in different ways into the future. Indigenous knowledge is holistic and works off of multiple variables. Science typically works by eliminating variables, whereas we often are asking different questions, or science is, and there's a need for both indigenous knowledge as well as science. I think it's important also that we recognize that indigenous knowledge is tied to a larger human rights framework, and Aili Keskatello's comments in the first panel revealed some of the important legal characteristics and legal effects of indigenous peoples and their knowledge, and as well as their rights. In this regard, I would submit that, like the nature of human rights, which are interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible, indigenous knowledge as a holistic form and body of knowledge is also interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible, especially from the profound relationship that indigenous peoples have to their environment. When I say a human rights framework, I'm talking specifically about the world community and their affirmation of the distinct rights and status of indigenous peoples, including acknowledgement and affirmation of indigenous knowledge as an important contribution to not only our lifeways, but also a major contribution to science and the power of knowledge and the production of knowledge as we move forward. Specifically, indigenous knowledge has been recognized and affirmed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, by the International Labor Organization's Convention number 169, of which I know Norway to have acceded to or ratified, as well as affirmed in the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and a range of other legal instruments. Significantly, treaty bodies and courts are beginning to acknowledge and affirm the importance of indigenous knowledge. So in this way, in terms of its legal effects, it's very, very critical. But it also speaks to the validity and the legitimacy of indigenous knowledge, the importance of indigenous knowledge. And in this way, we've had difficulties with the acceptance and the understanding of indigenous knowledge by many scientists. Hopefully, we can eventually turn the corner and ensure that there is legitimacy and respect for and recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge, but at the same time recognizing that it is distinct from science, but it can assist science and society. In terms of the production of indigenous knowledge, the continuing production of indigenous knowledge, it is important to recognize and respect the rights of indigenous peoples in order for the production of indigenous knowledge to thrive. And in this way, I mean recognition of the rights to lands, territories, and resources, as Aili mentioned earlier, the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples. The largest challenge in terms of the co-production of knowledge and indigenous knowledge and science is the lack of equity, the lack of equality between science and indigenous knowledge. There is a fundamental need for trust and respect. And such an approach, co-production of knowledge, can indeed be beneficial to everyone. Indigenous knowledge has extraordinary power. If you think about especially the rapid and urgent changes that we're seeing in the Arctic region, indeed the contributions of the Inuit, the Sami, and other Arctic indigenous peoples, as well as indigenous peoples across the globe, in the way of climate change and the wide range of issues facing us, there is much to gain from respecting and recognizing the power of indigenous knowledge. Qianat.